economic system is one in which growth in production of goods and services is seen as the primary responsibility of the economy, and that is actually something that is generally useful to the people in a country. Unfortunately, however, the idea that this must continue and accelerate is central to the ideas of economics that govern modern political systems, and that's where we get into trouble, because production of goods and services always requires taking resources from the environment and releasing pollution back to the environment. There is no process on Earth, even mental processes, that do not require resources, energy and materials, and result in wastes, some large, some small. Okay, taking resources from the environment, perfectly okay. That's how life developed and how life continues. The question is not whether it is a good or bad thing, but whether it's excessive in relation to its surrounding environment. We all know that when a population of animals gets greater than the, let's say, the grassland that they live on, everybody's seen pictures, David Attenborough shows about Africa and so forth, and when a grassland becomes overgrazed, then the animals die or have to move on. If there's nowhere to move on, then they die. Humans, due to technology, have actually managed to significantly get round that problem, especially the Western technologically developed nations. Using technology, they can, and particularly the fossil fuels that are stored sunlight over millions and millions of years, enable us to get extra energy, and some of us call this like energy slaves to work for us. Because in subsistence societies, our ancestors, and that's only 50, 100 years ago, used to have to survive primarily on the results of what sunshine could do in terms of crops and so forth, and trees and shrubs and food and all the rest of it. But in the last 50 and 100 years, and especially in the last, since World War II, the enormous increase in availability of fossil fuels has led humanity to the idea that we can have more and more and more forever, and this never needs to stop. Unfortunately, it ain't so. Technology has marvelous advantages, but technology can only do what Mother Nature allows us to do. And Mother Nature set certain rules which are not widely understood, but they relate primarily to the way in which energy interacts with matter in order to produce a transformation. Sunshine reacts with chlorophyll in green plants to produce sugars and other materials that enable the plants to grow, and as far as humans are concerned, produce crops that we can harvest and which feed us. By using sunshine, we were able to get through 500,000 years of human development and history up to the Industrial Revolution. Much of the Industrial Revolution, the early stages, was fueled by cutting down forests, which is sunshine developed through green plants into trees into timber. Then they discovered coal, which is simply forests millions of years old that were converted under the ground by geological processes. That's also stored sunshine. Then we discovered oil and gas. These won't last forever, but we think they will. And without them, we will not be able to do the sort of transformation of matter and energy into useful goods and services. That's not just food, but it's also buildings and aeroplanes and all the rest of it that we thought we could do. What does that say then about economic growth? It means that economic growth cannot continue the way it has done for the last century or more. But the basic ideas of economics and of economists and of politicians are that we've been able to do that in the past and keep on growing, therefore we can do it in the future. And therein lies the fundamental scientific error, which physics and ecology are helping us discover, but the economists and the politicians in particular don't want to know. Neither does the average Joe citizen, because we've never had it so good. Why should we not continue to? Well, I have to say that the works of, that we've been doing in Sustainable Aotearoa New Zealand, and many scientists, enlightened economists, and some politicians and so forth have been working on over the last 30 or 40 years in particular, is telling us we are now reaching a transition stage in human development in which we have to learn to manage without the same cheap, readily available resources that we've been using in the past, particularly of energy, and most particularly of all, petroleum and oil. That doesn't mean there won't be any, but it does mean that it's going to become much more expensive. What does this mean? It means that the production of goods and services in economies is going to become much more expensive and difficult, and it's a corollary of this at the same time, that the pollution and waste associated with them is going to become significantly worse. The reason is that humanity isn't stupid. We've used the easily accessible, clean resources first. The high quality resources have been used. There's still some more, but not vast quantities more. As the recent Louisiana oil spill indicated, humanity is now having to move into more and more inhospitable, difficult, expensive, dirty places in order to get more oil. You just look back half a century to the Beverly Hillbillies, and Pa Clampett actually just dug a shovel down in his backyard and found oil. The BP oil spill, oil well in Louisiana, was 1,000 feet below. It was a mile below the sea surface and a mile below the seabed under that. Compare that with Pa Clampett's shovel. And this is going on right around the world. We aren't actually facing that reality very well. There's a second point associated with it, which is that growth has continued for so long that the monetary system associated with it has developed to serve growth. If you can always depend upon growth, then you can create debt through the banks, the monetary system, because economic growth will mean that there's more money in the future which can be used to pay back the debt and the interest. Now, if we're not going to have more debt, what's going to happen to repayment of debt and interest? If we're not going to have more growth, what's going to happen to debt and interest? One of the examples is that the last 2 years, the international financial meltdown, sure, it's been heavily involved with mortgages, dud mortgages and all the rest of it in the United States, but these were entered into by the US government and by the Lehman Brothers and all of the other big banks, because they assumed there would always be the opportunity to pay it back with the next increment of growth. So you create debt, even dud debt, and somehow you'll find the money to be able to pay it back later. And the confidence in this led them to produce even more extraordinary and ridiculous money issues that were less and less stable. They knew they were unstable. And I have to say that the venality of the financial sector there and the dishonesty were at the center of all of this, but it was all driven that these people would not be there doing what they did do without the assumption that growth can continue forever. If it can't, then the whole house of cards collapses, which it has been doing and shows every signs of continued to do. Unfortunately, the main reaction of the politicians in this and the economists, with on notable exceptions, but not many of them, is that this was a glitch in the system and we can put it right. Well, science, ecology and so forth are saying, sorry guys, we've reached the end of that stage of human development. We've got to be ready for another phase of human development in which we learn to live within our constraints. And actually what we are also saying is that that process may be difficult. It's nowhere near as difficult as what will happen if we continue with the current one, because it will end in a crash inevitably, and the crash will be horrendously painful for all of humanity. Or we can start to make difficult and painful changes now in order to prepare for a different future in which we believe, and we believe there is very good evidence for it, we could have something much more satisfactory than the sort of rat race that we've got into in recent years.
Start the debate and discussion now about economic alternatives. Stop accepting that the way we live now is something we cannot change, because we can.